Hello! I've got this early model TC Max in for repair, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to run through the differences between this 2020 model and later versions. They're not massively different, but there's definitely some things you might like to know if you're thinking about buying a second-hand TC Max. The first thing you might notice is the handlebars. On the early model the bars are quite flat, which nicely fits in with the cafe racer style. If you value comfort over aesthetics, you might prefer the higher bars on the later TC Max. Although the bars are different, the controls and clocks appear to be the same. Another way of easily identifying an early bike is the location of the breaker switch, which is in the battery compartment, whilst the later model has it under the seat. Now here's some slightly more important differences. The older bike has a 6-pin battery connector. When you compare it to the later 7-pin connector, you can see the size of the main conductors is much smaller. The cable leaving the connector is also considerably thinner. At the other end of the cable you can see why. The wires that connect the battery to the motor controller are also thinner. Looking at the motor controllers, you can see they're completely different units. The one on the left is from a later model and the one on the right is from the early model. The spec on the new one shows it's rated at 72 volts and 81 amps. I've measured the peak current at 90 amps. This works out at around 6.5 kilowatts. The older model is also rated at 72 volts, but only 60 amps with a peak of 70 amps. That works out at around 5 kilowatts. So there's a 1.5 kilowatt difference between the two. So that's a brief rundown of the differences between the early TC Max and the current version. Given there's a considerable difference in power, I would suggest that the earlier models should have their price adjusted accordingly. Unless you find a particularly well priced early model, I would preferably look out for a later one. That's not to say you couldn't upgrade an early bike to the later spec or even add an aftermarket controller. So if you intend to do major upgrades, older cheaper bikes might be a better option. I fitted the R&G tail tidy to this bike. It was a bit pricey at £170, but it's nicely made from aluminium and comes with a wiring loom that plugs straight into the bike's loom. The rear light was included but the indicators weren't, so I refitted the original ones. I think it looks pretty good. Let's hope the owner's happy with it. I hope that's helpful for anybody looking at second-hand bikes. There are some real bargains to be had out there, and the TC Max is a great fun little bike. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Sunny afternoons, going for a drive, loving the scenery, go the extra mile. Not the same places, but the same feeling.